All right, so first I want to thank all of you for coming out in the middle of Dead Week. But today I have the pleasure of introducing you to Bill Evers, a research fellow here at the Hoover Institution and a member of Hoover's Task Force on K-12 education. Evers specializes in research on education policy, especially as it relates to curriculum, teaching, testing, accountability, and school finance. In 2010, former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger appointed Evers to the California State Academic Content Standards Commission. And from 2007 to 2009, Evers was called to Washington, D.C. to serve as the Bush administration's Assistant Secretary of Education for Policy. As usual, we want to encourage you to think of questions while Mr. Evers is speaking, and we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. Again, I just want to say this event is being streamed live over Facebook, so at the end, please wait until I can get the microphone to you before you ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, education, kindergarten through high school education, is a huge topic. It's a huge topic. So, what I thought I would do is sort of intellectually tease you with some things that are going on, and in a sense prompt some questions from that. But I want to start out by sketching a little background, because it seems to me that it's worthwhile having some background. So I want to sketch out some about ideology, and then some about the federal role, and indeed even the state role, and then something about current events. So we'll dig into current events. Okay, so the first thing is we are out there in education, and because taxpayers' money is involved in public education, which is essentially about 90% of the kids are in public schools, and so where there's taxes, there's going to be politics, right? So we have the usual sort of liberal and conservative ideologies at work here. But within education, we also have some ideologies, if you want to say. So there's ideologies of teaching, and there's ideologies of governing the public schools. So in teaching, the struggle is between progressive education, and here I have to be a little bit caricaturing of the two sides, because it would take maybe many lectures to get into this, but the progressives versus the traditionalists. So in teaching, the progressives, this is again a caricature and not unfair to them in some ways, believe in learning through discovery, learning through inquiry, okay? Their critics would say learn through play, okay? They have other views, such as waiting till a child is developmentally appropriate before certain things of cognitive challenge are tried, and various things like that. But the main thing is this discovery learning. Okay. So the second area, and the traditionalists believe in things like lectures and learning your times tables and stuff like that. Okay. So all right. So. And you can mix, I mean, in truth, these are sort of polarities or modal descriptions of a sort that are, you can mix these. Okay, so then in governance, you have another group that could also be called progressive, but for clarity's sake, I'll call it municipal reform movement. So beginning in the 1890s and continuing essentially through World War I, there was a progressive epoch, and at that time there was a municipal reform movement. And so instead of electing powerful mayors, the idea was to have a professional city manager and a more or less consulting city council that, and so professionalism and managerialism and scientific, social science, behavioral science was supposedly going to govern things, and things would be very smooth. Elections would be at large in the city for city council positions. City manager would do everything, but he would get sort of broad public nodding agreement from the city council. So this is extended also into education. The superintendent is the benevolent despot and enlightened despot. And the school board is really elected to cast broad approval on what the staff is doing. But really, the staff are running things. So we'll call that municipal reform. And the alternative would be a strong school board that was actually setting policy. And one of the things that was definitely sought in the progressive era was to prevent the school board from really having any say, whether from tradition or training them or some kinds of exclusion from curriculum, okay? So those are sort of some underlying things. We have our regular liberal versus conservative, and I want to mention a few other things about how this municipal reform era governance works in school board elections. So first of all, for example, in California, school districts do not coincide with other boundaries except in unusual cases like San Francisco, which is very peculiar because it's both a city and a county and a school district all wrapped up in one. But take Palo Alto School District here. It doesn't actually coincide with Palo Alto boundaries. It includes Stanford and it includes part of Los Altos Hills. Elections are not held at a normal time like November. They're held at some odd time like March. They're nonpartisan, so there's no waiting alternative government. There's no waiting, if you're thinking of political science and you think of Pareto and his idea of circulation of elites, there's no elite waiting to substitute for the existing elite. The dominant group, which is sort of the PTA people in this area, are there and they co-opt new people. Or if there's an upstart, that upstart really doesn't end up having much strength. So this is sort of the world of this. So then we have history as it's unrolling. And so we have a series of attempts by the federal government to increase its power. So after World War II, there was life adjustment. This was teaching everybody how to fit in. How to bake a cherry pie, what to do on a date, how to pick a dentist. You may think I'm kidding. This was pushed on all the schools of the country by the federal government. So then came Sputnik. Okay, so Sputnik is in 1957, and this is a Soviet orbital satellite, and it's a great shock. Okay, so Thomas Bailey, a famous historian, says this is the Pearl Harbor of the education world. And so then the federal government tries a new thing. They turn to certain politically active scientists, especially in the fields of physics, biology, chemistry, and so forth, and they ask them to create curricula, and then they try to push that around the country. And it doesn't work very well. So there's even a famous, funny song written about the new math. You can look up Tom Lehrer, Lehrer, was a math teacher at UC Santa Cruz, and he wrote a very, very funny song called The New Math. And it's very complicated, and the refrain is, and only a child could do it, because the parents can't do it, the teachers can't do it, and really, ultimately, the children couldn't do it either. So there was a social studies version of this that came in a few years later, but the same money stream, federal money stream, caused a tremendous upset around the country, particularly in West Virginia. There was a widespread open rebellion against public schools in West Virginia. And so this was withdrawn. It was mainly, the main objection, there were a lot of objections, but the main objection was it was teaching cultural relativism. They were, showing Eskimos, taking old, this is not really as common as you might think in legend, but anyway. They had Eskimos deserting elderly people so they would die and not impose, this sort of story. I'm not an expert on Eskimos, but anyway, they showed stuff like that, and it got parents upset, and so it was withdrawn ultimately. It doesn't really exist anymore. So anyway, there have been a series of these things, and we're in another of these pushes for a national curriculum of some sort right now. And at the same time that this was going on, the federal government was expanding its capacity to do things. So before World War II, there was, the federal government really only collected statistics in terms of its involvement in education. It did a few other things, but they were very, very minor. But because of perceived crises, some of them perhaps real crises, it depends on how you want to think about it. The critics sometimes call them manufactured crises or spurious crises. The federal government tried these efforts at expanding its efforts into the classroom in various ways, and it also increased its power and size. So first, during the War on Poverty, there was the main federal aid to education law, Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, and it's now called No Child Left Behind. It's just an expanded descendant of that same law. Then in 1979, under President Carter, the U.S. Department of Education was started. And so that's, of course, increased in size and capacity. And then another milepost was during the Clinton and George W. Bush, so the Bush 43 era, there was an expansion of federal interest in standards and accountability. Now, at this time, was standards and accountability. So accountability is testing and seeing how the kids are doing. Are they actually learning the material? And standards are the lists of what are the topics that they should be learning in each grade. So in the Clinton and George W. Bush eras, the states were doing this, okay? Well, what's happening now is that Obama is having this done at the national level. So there's the national standards and there's national testing, and national curriculum is sort of coming out of this also. All right, so now education is not doing that well, okay, compared to some other industrial countries. We know we're spending a lot of money. Those of you who went to my talk to the College of Republicans know I showed these famous charts where spending is going up like this and performance is basically flat, okay? It's not completely flat because in the No Child Left Behind years, there has been modest but steady improvement. But it's certainly not looking productive in terms of the amount of money that's spent. And we've seen other countries move out of sort of the mediocre ranks in national comparative tests, the middle ranks or even lower ranks, and go and climb. So we've seen Canada, Australia, and Singapore. These were not all necessarily the high performers that they are today. But America has stayed in this mediocre position for as long as they've been taking international comparative tests. So there's, without, being overly alarmist and saying everything is falling, the sky is falling and so forth, it's clear that American schools, public schools, are not living up to the potential that the students in these schools would have for learning. So there are two main reform strategies, and I'm going to get into the current best and worst of 2011 in the context of this. So there's two main, we can even say there's three reform strategies, and one is not, in my opinion, really a reform strategy. So the first one that I don't think is really a reform strategy is just spend, system basically stays the same, just spend scads more money on it, right? Just open the floodgates, just pour in the cash, okay? Now, you might say, well, that's sort of silly. If the existing system isn't working very well, what is the point? But you are like somewhat conservative, so naturally you might think that it would be foolish to pour good money after bad. But the people who argue for this say that the basic problem is not the existing structures, the existing teachers, the existing incentives, which you might think. It's really just not enough funds, okay? So if we would put more money in, all would be well. So the two big reform strategies are one I have just referred to earlier, which is standards and accountability. So remember, that's the list of topics that the kids are supposed to learn in each grade, and then there's testing to see how they're doing. And there are maybe rewards and sanctions for schools or teachers or districts or states when this either happens, they succeed, or they don't succeed. Okay, so that's standards and accountability. The alternative one is a structural one, and it mostly revolves around parental choice. There's some sort of things that are somewhat similar to parental choice. For example, district deconsolidation. So if you look at the Boston area versus the Los Angeles area, for the same income in the Boston area, you could live in a bunch of different towns that have different successes levels for their school district. So one might be quite successful, one might not be so successful. You could move around. At the margins, you could maybe help yourself. It's not a great thing, but it puts a little competitive pressure on people. The main things are opportunity scholarships that are also called choice scholarships or vouchers. So this is like a ticket that you can use for tuition, and you can use it in either a public or private school, and you're a mobile person, and the money is essentially backpacked on you, and when you're young, your parents are making the decision, and they're trying to put you in the place that's going to be best for you, where you'll be most educationally successful. So that's that idea of vouchers or opportunity scholarships. And the other idea is charter schools. So charter schools are public schools that are deregulated. So if you're irregularly in government schools, they have 20 volumes of laws, say in the state that govern this education code of the state. But if you're a charter school, you only have to follow the health and safety and no racial discrimination and some things of that nature. Very, very basic things, and the other detailed burdens of regulation and red tape are not on you. And so these can take people from more or less anywhere to be in these public schools. And so this forms a way for people to escape from failing schools, and both the opportunity scholarships do that and the charter schools, and they also form a pressure on the existing regular public schools to do better, else presumably they will lose the students and they will lose the money attached to the students. Of course, politicians often don't have them feel this competitive pressure. They cushion them against this and so forth. Okay, so let me go into some of these things that just happened in this last year. So we on the Koret Task Force, so before this, I've been really me speaking. Now I'm kind of the Koret Task Force, which is Hoover's group, both residential people here and people scattered around the country that work in cooperation together on education. So I'll talk about that a little bit, and I'll talk some more about the national standards, and then we'll get some questions. Okay, so the best thing that happened, let's start with the best thing, what the heck, was that there was a huge outpouring of opportunity to get these vouchers, to get these choice fellowships, these choice scholarships. So this had been available for a while. It had been tried. There had been a Supreme Court case saying that this was allowable. But still, the special interest groups involved in education had held this back. And as an example of how they were holding it back, during the Bush administration and a time when there was greater Republican strength in Congress, Washington, D.C., which is a school system that's really at the final level under the control of Congress, not a state, had one of these opportunity scholarship programs. And it was incredibly successful. The kids in it matched against somebody of the same socioeconomic background. The kids, the black kids especially, were like a grade ahead of their counterparts. So this is a lot in education. It's tough to make big changes, big increments of change. And, but this is anathema to some of the special interest groups, particularly the teachers' unions. So they essentially we're going to let this run out, okay? And this is despite President Obama having said, you know, whatever is proven to work, we will support and so forth. This is practically, certainly a paraphrase and perhaps even a quote from him, but for political reasons, and all parties do this, not just the Democrats, he was going to let it close down. And Speaker Boehner, when the Republicans took over the House, said, no, we're going to restore this. So that happened. And then in Indiana, which is the main reforming state of this last year, we gave them a special award for how many, many things Indiana has done, both expanding charters and these opportunity scholarships and looking at labor reform and changing the, but remember I said how they have the elections at a peculiar time in many places, like here in Palo Alto? Indiana moved it to November, so that regular people would be able to have an influence on what was going on in the school districts. So back to the opportunity scholarship. So, and then in Ohio, where they'd had a cap on the number of charter schools, they removed the cap. So there was a lot of very, very good developments on the choice front. Let me give you another example of a positive development that we had on the standards and accountability front. And this again has to do with Washington, D.C. So there's a woman named Michelle Rhee, and she's something of a, if there are any celebrities among wonkish people, she's kind of a celebrity among wonkish people. So she used to be working on teacher training and how to have better teachers and make sure teachers could do a good job, were equipped, had intellectual ammunition, were comfortable in the classroom, being successful with students. And then she was asked by the preceding mayor of Washington, D.C., would you come in and head the school district? And, you know, as they say, this is a little cliche that we have in policy reform, break some china, right? So go in there and do some stuff, okay? So she went in there, and one of the main things she did was she set up an evaluation form, an evaluation approach, an evaluation process for teachers. So to scrutinize whether they were being successful. I mean, it's very, very common in the public schools of America to have less than half of the students proficient on standardized tests showing what they've learned, and all the teachers considered satisfactory or above in their ratings. This is almost universally the case. I mean, there is a lawsuit right now in Los Angeles because in Los Angeles, I'm getting off my Washington, D.C. topic, but it's on point of that. In Los Angeles, in all of California since the 1970s, it has been a law, a state law, that you shall evaluate all teachers by the California standards tests. How many districts are doing this? None. So some friends of mine and the parents are suing the Los Angeles School District because they're not following the law. So the law says shall. It doesn't say if you feel like it, you can do this. And they haven't been following it. Okay, so this is decades of not following it. Well, the same thing has been true around the country and was true in Washington. And so Michelle Rhee put in a complex thing, but a major component was how well are the students doing based on objective test scores. So we thought that when she was essentially forced out, when the new mayor came in, that they would dump this, but they haven't. So this was a great positive development for sort of the standards and accountability side of reform, because the students are taught to these standards, they're given these accountability tests, and the system is being judged, in this case, the teaching workforce is being judged on how well are the students performing in the light of this academic framework. So this is the sort of thing that's going on. So I'll list a few of these other things, and I'll talk a little more about national standards and national curriculum, and then we'll take your questions. So I mentioned the voucher thing. So another thing that happened that the Koret Task Force thought was good was the rollback of collective bargaining agreements in Wisconsin, Indiana, New Jersey, Idaho, and temporarily in Ohio. A third thing that we liked was the California State Board of Education ruling that parent trigger would be able to operate in a regularized way, in a normalized way. I can explain in questions and answers what is parent trigger. It's sort of an interesting idea. And it's especially interesting because it's a reform that's come from the liberal camp. although embraced by conservatives also. So it's an interesting thing that both conservatives and liberals are for this, and the only people really against it are the unions and the administration. There's union in California. There's associations of principals. There's associations of school superintendents. Everybody's got a union. So anyway, so they're all against this too. And I mentioned our high regard for the overall record of Indiana. What were some of the bad things? Well, the bad things were the Atlanta cheating scandal. So like 180 educators were involved in that, and how the press reported on that. Again, I can answer questions about that. The bungling of the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind, both by Congress, both parties in Congress, and what has our Constitution-ignoring, Constitution-oblivious president been doing? He's been using highly illegal conditional waivers to get his way in education. There's more of this federal overreach, of which this national curriculum thing is another thing. Postponement by the people who won a special grant process with the Obama administration called Race to the Top. The states all promise stuff, they're not delivering. The Obama people are not holding them to it. Jerry Brown signing a law saying, in our budget-strapped times, instead of even being able to fire teachers or fire other educational-related people like under superintendent for curriculum or something like that, the only thing they can do is cut instructional days. Okay, crazy, huh? He did that. And he also vetoed a law in which he said, I don't really think testing is a good idea, objective testing, because it doesn't measure character and it doesn't measure love of learning. Well, whoever claimed it did. I mean, this is just sort of utopianism to even think that we're going to somehow be able to evaluate that. And so I mentioned the Ohio situation being reversed. Okay, so let me just close by saying a little bit about this national curriculum thing. So as I mentioned before in my examples of the life adjustment thing, where baking a cherry pie was the thing the federal government was promoting, and then when I mentioned the new math, new physics, new biology after Sputnik, where they had set theory and very strong formalism in mathematics and number systems in bases other than 10 and all sorts of things that teachers really didn't know much how to teach, and parents didn't know how to help kids with their homework, and it really didn't turn out to be all that useful anyway. And they did all these same sort of things in other scientific areas, and then it started spilling over into social studies. So we're having a sort of a similar thing. So what happened was and by the way, I'm now off what the Koret Task Force did. This is only Bill Evers speaking, and the Koret Task Force is divided in their attitudes toward this, and you can ask me how that could be the case. But anyway, so we have this law in place, the No Child Left Behind law of 2001, that was passed under Bush 43, George W. Bush, and it says all kids have to be covered with these standards and accountability if you want federal aid to education, okay? So into this, Obama is saying by all sorts of goads and incentives to take a set of standards developed by the Washington lobbyists for the Governors Association and the Washington lobbyists for state superintendents and some other groups, some of which are sort of set up by them. They've developed a set of these academic standards for the whole country, and they put little things in, this is very inside baseball, in the scoring rubrics and so forth to get grants, so that it ended up there's only going to be one set of standards. So there's not going to be any pluralism. This is going to be one. And so they've gotten this, and they now, sometimes very voluntarily, but a lot of them were goaded into it, incentivized into it. And it happened very fast. There was no deliberation, and only 5 states did the state legislatures look at this, for example. So in 60 days, they signed up all these states with the pot of money as the lure. So this is sort of a bait and switch. It was done, a similar thing was done in the Clinton years. So they had a thing in the Clinton years called Goals 2000. And they offered a pot of money for the states if they would adopt certain goals and do certain things. And then a few months later, they passed a reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and they made it compulsory. All things that were, so they had touted were going to be voluntary. So the same thing's going on here. There's other deceptive and weird practices, but I can't really get into it without leaving you no time for question. So they're having a bait and switch. So they offered these states this big pot of money during a terrible recession, and they got all these states, over 40 states at the beginning, and a few more have dribbled in since, to seek this pot of money and to tie onto these national standards. And then as soon as they'd done that, they gave out all this money for national tests and to develop curriculum to go with the tests and go with the standards, so national curriculum. The peculiar thing about this is now under the Obama administration. Clinton, one model of bait and switch, Obama another model. So just leave you before I do questions. The interesting thing is, all this federal intervention in curriculum is against the law, okay? There are 3 explicit statutes that say the U.S. Department of Education is not to be interfering with or directing curriculum. So it's in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, currently called No Child Left Behind. It's in the Department of Education Organization Act of 1979. So that was during the Carter years, and that's what set up the U.S. Department of Education. It didn't really exist in this standalone cabinet level way before then. And before that, there was another law, which still is on the books, called the General Education Provisions Act. And it also says no federal involvement, no endorsing, no creating, none of this, nothing to do with curriculum, okay? So I'll just leave it at that. A little constitutional and legislative overreach during the Obama years, and take your questions. Sir. Take the mic. You're gonna recognize the questioners. Is that you're gonna be the moderator? I think. Okay. So he is gonna you get his attention to ask the questions,
Hi,
and then
thanks.
I will pretend to answer. Right.
Yeah, thanks for your talk. I actually spent the summer doing a lot of research on education in my home state of Arizona, and I just wanted to briefly mention 2 things. The first is you were talking about school district deconsolidation, but in Phoenix, it's kind of the opposite problem. The city of Phoenix itself, not the metro area, has 25 different school districts.
Wow.
And that means you need 25 school boards and 25 superintendents and 25 staffs and 25 different curriculums, and it's just, it makes it a big mess. And those are all K through 8 districts only, and then you have separate high school districts. So it gets very messy. So I was just wondering what you would think about that.
Okay.
And then the second thing is, I've kind of been in favor of the idea of the Common Core standards, mostly because in Arizona, I mean, the No Child Left Behind required states to show, a certain level of students had proficiency, but they could determine what that meant. And Arizona has deliberately set the bar extremely low so they would get higher numbers. And I think, if everyone...
So let's answer these two questions. These are 2 great questions. So the first question had to do with the deconsolidation situation. And I'm not, Arizona is so we have sort of different political cultures, right? New York and Alaska are different politically, right? I guess the real extremes are supposedly Utah and Maryland. Okay, so Utah is Democrats do become mayors of Salt Lake City, and things like that happen. But Utah is pretty conservative and pretty Republican, and Maryland, again, there are areas around Frederick or something, or on various seashore areas where there's some Republicans, especially in local government. But basically, Maryland is Democratic, okay? So, so Arizona is localistic, conservative. It's a mountain state. Mountain states and the southern states are culturally the more conservative. And Arizona is really one of the most, you also don't have statewide adoption of textbooks. I think you sort of were getting at some of that. And many states have that, but Arizona doesn't. It's all local district adoption. So It makes for some interesting challenges. I'm not saying that I'm just not enough of an expert on Arizona to say much more than, I wish we could have 25 districts where we have Los Angeles unified right now, though, you see? And I'm sure it has its disadvantages, but I also think that they can do things in common if they want to. And if they don't want to, okay. So Arizona has also some of the best choice provisions in the country in terms of tax credits, in terms of ease of starting a charter school. I don't really disagree. I do know back when Lisa Graham Keegan was the state superintendent, I went in and I looked at the math test with some colleagues. And the test at that time was so hard that nobody was passing or getting 10% pass. And so we tried to rebuild the test, and I wasn't involved with where they set the cut scores, which is the important thing, but to try to have building blocks of what the standard was be tested as well as the final standard, so that you could get some kinds of intermediate scores. You weren't having just 10% pass and all the rest of the people down at some horribly low level. So your second question had to do with the national standards and different levels of proficiency being set in the different states. Okay, so the first thing to realize is the states that are in this national testing have not agreed to have a common cut score. This is yet to be decided. So I was at a meeting and I was kind of in a debate with the superintendent of Indiana last week. And he said, if they have a common cut score, we will walk. We want to completely be in charge of setting our cut score. So the people who imagine, such as you, that there's going to be a common cut score, you might be right.
At least it'd be the same standards.
Yes, but the supposed, there's already NAEP, okay? There's already a common test that goes on a common scale, but it's not testing every child, it's testing a sampling of children. So we can tell, at least on that, which is not perfect because it has its own idea of what the content ought to be, which might not match that in the state. And so it has its problems, but it's a rough yardstick, and it does exist, National Assessment of Education Progress. So we already can say that Louisiana and Mississippi are not doing as well as Massachusetts. Okay, we have a common metric for that. This complaint of the people who fashion on, so these people originally, the same people, there's a cadre of people that have been pushing for this national curriculum for a long time. Going back to Bush 41, the father of our recent president. But it's the same set of people, they're older now and more experienced at it. They were complaining back then we can't do state-by-state comparison, and then they got the NAEP. Originally it wasn't state-by-state, this test. It is now, it has been for a long time. And so now they say the parents are fooled. The parents get this report from the state, and the state, using its cut scores, says, on its own test, says, oh, Johnny or Susie is doing great, okay? And the kid gets to college and is in all these remediation classes, or the kid goes to work and the employer looks at the kid and says, boy, we got to retrain you, right? Even though this child might have been getting B's, right? Really should have been getting C- or worse. The problem is the states are going to, they have not surrendered the right to how they're going to report all this to the parents, okay? So you can say, well, the newspapers will make this clear. Well, the newspapers could have been making it clear now, okay? So I don't think your dream will come true, but it's an interesting dream. Okay, sir, yes. Gotta wait till you get I'm gonna take a sip of this while you. Product placement, cups of gold.
I mean, you talked a little bit about school choice and the kind of the innovations that are going on there.
Right.
And I was wondering, given that, I don't know, people are talking about things like maybe college is not for everyone. Like Peter Thiel recently did a thing where he
Right.
financed people to drop out of.
I knew Peter Thiel when he was a Stanford student.
Yeah. Is there a movement, or should there be a movement? What level of kind of inception is it at right now, to kind of establish a sense of curriculum choice, where it seems like what we're doing right now in a lot of states is dumbing down curriculum so that everyone can pass a certain test or a certain kind of thing, but in that some kids may not necessarily, be prepared at all, and some kids might be stuck in places that are, dumbed down enough for them.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I think we got
Yeah.
two questions in here as I tease
Yeah.
them apart. The first one is, are we putting too many or too few or just right, Goldilocks type question, into college? And the second thing is, are the standards being lowered? So those are two things at least you want me to talk about.
I think it was more like, should there be curriculum choice, I think? Or like,
Okay.
should there be a system of, take that idea of like not necessarily going to college down even.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I get you.
I
get you. All right, so again, we need to unpack this a little bit. So people will say things like, people I worked for have said, well, the jobs that are growing at the greatest speed are ones that require college degrees, or at least some college. You will hear this phrase, okay? But, and there's probably true that there are some jobs that are growing do need some college for, and it's not the same thing to be on an automobile assembly plant, if we still have some of those in the United States. We do, I know, we do. But it's still much more training and knowledge is needed than in the time of Henry Ford and the beginning of the Ford Motor Company. It's a lot more complicated. You do need algebra, for example. Okay, so we are artificially stimulating people to go to college by the subsidization of it. So, and the fact that people stay on for a long time is related to this and so forth. So it could be that it's no doubt the case that some people are going to college for whom it's really not a benefit in their life program. It's also possible that there are other people that we're not picking up that could benefit from a college education, but for various unfortunate reasons, they're not being offered scholarships, they're not picking us up, they get diverted through just life chances into not being on a college stream, and it would have been better for them. But life is like that. But it would be better if we pick up people, somehow find them that would benefit from college work. So then your second question has to do with, wouldn't it be better if we had some diversity of curricula? Particularly, I think you're talking about high school.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's true, and most industrialized countries offer some diversity of curriculum in high school. And there was recently a Harvard study that indicated that this was called for in America more than it is. I think it's also true that we had a problem in the time when we had a lot of vocational education programs and consumer math and things like that, that some students were maybe picked out for racial reasons or on the basis of inadequate information on the teacher's part or guidance counselor's part, and channeled into these programs where they might have benefited from being in a higher thing. So I guess the key thing is that whatever reforms we make, we should try to make sure that there are bridgeways, like summer schools or something, where you can try to move from one to another. And obviously, it's going to be harder the farther you go along to move between. But I do think that it's wrong to think of people as completely uniform in their desires and needs and what they feel they should be getting out of high school education. And there is a lot of one-size-fits-all in this. Now, I do want to say one other thing, though, about So what does the phrase, I'm going to interview one of you. What does the phrase college ready mean to you? So when you get the microphone, so what does the phrase college ready mean to you?
The student has sufficient writing and math skills so that they'll be successful in college.
Okay, so like what kind of a college? Heald Business College? What are we talking about here? Stanford? What
Community college.
Community college. Is that what it means?
I think so.
So why don't they say community college ready? Because actually that is what it means with these national standards. It means able to do C work in an entry-level class in community college. But it's possible, and it's possible because you're a realist and a well-informed person, to say community college. It's possible the general public thinks they mean, oh, four-year college, could go to San Jose State, could go to Chico State, could go to Cal State Northridge. No, that's not what it's saying. It's quite a bit lower than that. And the problem is that in some states, they have lowered this a lot. Like in California, we were shooting for Algebra 1 in 8th grade. So the highest performing countries in the world have Algebra 1 in 8th grade or an equivalent. Maybe they're taking half of algebra and half of geometry in 8th grade and half of Algebra 1 and half of geometry in 9th grade. But by the end of 9th grade, they've done both, similar to what you would have if you did all of algebra in 8th grade and all of geometry in 9th grade, okay? So there's, the world is a very diverse place on these things, but so Minnesota had all its kids in Algebra 1 in 8th grade, and we had 60% of our kids in Algebra 1 in 8th grade. National standards put Algebra 1 in 9th grade, so we're already a grade behind the high-performing countries of the world. And California, which has taken, a decade to try to make this thing, to move people up a grade, essentially just being retarded, being pushed backwards by this national standards thing. So I don't, the same is true with other states that have high standards like Massachusetts. And Massachusetts not only has high standards, but they also have high success. And they climbed there. 20 years ago, they were not doing very well. But under Governor Weld, they put in tough standards, tough testing. They put in the academic support so that the teachers could do it. They had a solid curriculum, and they really made progress. They are doing fabulously. And they have another thing. They have a tradition of solid academic schooling going back to the earliest days of America. And that helps them. There's no doubt that helps them. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Can you compare the merits between charter and magnet schools? And then maybe what are your thoughts on lottery entrance methods? Would a meritocracy system be better?
Okay, so magnet schools and charter schools are different animals, so to speak. A magnet school is a specialized, regular public school. So it probably has a theme like math and science or theatrical and performing arts or something like that. It could be a histories and humanities one. Those are less common, but that's, those are some examples. So then the idea of it is, and the purpose of it is, it's both to give specialized thing in this, but it's often in a school district, an urban school district particularly, or a highly populated suburban one, where they're losing children to private schools, maybe to Catholic schools, something. And their parents are also leaving to suburbs or places where there are reputedly better schools. And so the idea is both to give the specialized thing and to keep the middle-class parents in the district so that they can be intermingling with the other parents and children. So some of these work out all right. It's like anything else. You can do things well and you can do them not so well. I would say magnet schools showed a lot of promise at the beginning. It hasn't really been transformative, and nor has it really stopped the flow of parents escaping the urban public schools. Charters are much more independent. They're not, the magnet school is really governed by the regular school board, the regular superintendent, and so forth. Charter school might be authorized by the local district or by the county district or by the state, or in some states by a university. In one state, labor unions are being given power to authorize charter schools, which is very unusual. Okay, so this is all going on, and so they also sometimes have themes, but often they're just, you know, sort of regularly offering the program, but maybe with a different curriculum or a different kind of teacher they're doing, or more time on task, or offering homework help from the teacher, or come in early if you want. They're not, the teachers there might work longer hours and things like that, but they know their students are really dedicated. They wouldn't be there. They're kind of volunteers to go there, and except in conversion cases. This is a long story. But so charter schools also, there are some failures. There are some that are not very good. We have some problems getting rid of unsuccessful charters. They're like anything else, a government agency. Though they're independent, they are like kind of a government agency. They're a kind of public school, and so it's hard to close anything down, right? I don't know if you know this, but you know, the Union Veterans Program for the money for the Union Army veterans from the Civil War went on. The Union Army had all died out. T-testing, but the most famous one is they used alpaca in the uniforms during World War I. And they had special alpaca. The American Army doesn't wear any uniforms made of alpaca anymore. The program went on, and like for 2 years they managed to crush it, and then it came back. We still have this. So like any government program, even bad charter schools, it's hard to close them down, but some of it goes on. They usually last for a while, like 5 years, and then they have to be renewed. Now, there's also a problem that good charter schools can get stopped in their birth, and they can get stopped at their renewal. And there's also a problem that since they only have this five-year window, it's tough for them to borrow money and all sorts of things like that. So the whole thing is complicated, but it is easier to get in or out of a charter school than a regular school. You're put in a regular school usually by your attendance district, so you're assigned there. And it's easier probably to shut down a failing charter school than a failing public school. So then your last question had to do with lotteries, which is a way of getting into charter schools sometimes. So, and might be a way to get into magnet schools. I never really studied magnet schools that much, but they probably have different formulas for trying to get people in. And so the thing is, these schools are oversubscribed. Parents are desperate to be in schools that will offer some opportunity for success for their child. And these movies like Waiting for Superman and The Lottery and so forth show the anguish of the parents trying to get into these schools, right? And it's tough. So some of you have gone to a highly selective college where there are 10, 20 applicants, qualified applicants for every spot. But the good thing is your other schools that you apply to are also really good. The problem for these parents is if they don't get in this lottery and get in, there's no, Princeton if you don't go to Stanford, okay? There's no even Lafayette College or Oberlin if you don't get into Stanford. There's horrible, horrible schools that are dangerous and where children are not learning. And so that's why you see that in these movies how upset these parents are if they don't get in and how overjoyed they are if they do get in. So let me get to parent trigger because this is related. This is another way. So in reform, in school reform, and we're getting close to the end of our hour here. In school reform, one of the problems is what academics would call a free rider problem, or it's a problem of group formation, okay? So In political science and in other social sciences, this is called rational choice, social choice, public choice, various things. So if you try to form a group to do something, to institute some reform, you might not end up being a beneficiary, okay? Maybe you're trying to reform the tax code for the whole country. Well, you only get a tiny piece of the benefit considering how costly it would be to try and organize such a thing. Okay, so in education, if there are 50,000 kids at stake and you put in the effort to reform the thing for 50,000 kids, you only get a tiny piece of gain for your child if you're a parent. And you might not even get that. So let's say you try and start a charter school. Okay, you can try and start the charter school, but then your child might well be part of the lottery and you might not get in because there might be 10 positions. So you go to all this work and it's hard to start a charter school. It's not easy, and then you don't get in. The thing of parent trigger is, let's say you're in a failing school. The parents can petition to convert this. There's a variety of drastic things that they can petition for, but the main thing is to turn it into a charter school. And so let's say, I don't know what exact numbers are, but I'm going to say it's 50% of the parents have to sign this, and then it happens, okay? So now it's a charter school, and a charter agency, and this might be specified in the charter, or it might specify how we're going to choose it after we just get to the point that we're going to have a charter. However they're doing it, there's different states that are doing it, but California is really the pioneer in this. So now, in that case, the parent gains the benefit for his or her child because his or her child is in the school where their conversion is taking place. The school is there. Now, the bad news is it's hard. You're partly in trying to do school reform, you're trying to do school culture. Okay, it's not just good teachers, but it's the patterns and expectations and habits, and this is partly why Catholic schools do well. There's a shared expectation about academics and about values and about behavior between the parents and the students and the teachers and the administration. And this is called the Catholic school effect in James Coleman's literature and other people's literature. So it's harder to do a conversion because you're trying to transform the culture as well as some of the teachers and things like that. So you're stuck with the traditions of the school. It's easier to start a new school, but neither of them are easy. So anyway, that's the story, and I thank you all very much. I think we're at essentially an hour, and it was a pleasure talking to you and answering your well-informed questions.
All right, so thank you very much to Bill Evers for coming out and giving us this wonderful luncheon talk. And I just want to remind everyone to please clean up your trash as you go. Thank you all for coming during Dead Week, so thank you very much.